Corporation versus limited liability company, or LLC. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to get started right now. Hi, my name is Taylor Darcy with Darcy Law. I work with startups, entrepreneurs, and small businesses to help them with their legal needs. So I get asked this question, I don't know, several times a day, or it comes up in conversation with people that are looking to start their business. And it's a very common one because it's kind of confusing. What business entity should they choose? So we're going to talk about that today. So as we've talked about in other videos, corporation requires you to file the articles of incorporation at the Secretary of State. You require these corporate formalities that you have to maintain regularly. And in turn, you're able to receive the limited liability protection. Now, a limited liability company, on the other hand, is a newer business entity. In fact, most instances, you have to, it's formed almost the same way, except for the limited liability company, or LLC, is you have what's called a membership interest as opposed to a stockholder. Now, it's a different term, but essentially the same thing. Now, there are some differences at a different level, but we're not going to go into those today. But with an LLC, there are required no corporate formalities. And what I mean by that is you don't have to have a shareholder agreement or bylaws or minutes or resolutions and all that other stuff, okay? That's a corporation. Corporation requires those things, LLC does not. Now, an LLC does, and you do want to have an operating agreement, which is kind of like bylaws, except for it tends to be a little simpler, but it outlines ownership interests, equity portion, some other contractual things that you'll want to do. And as I mentioned in the corporations video, bylaws allow you to change from the default rules that are law to more specific to your instance. So it really allows you to customize. And the same thing goes for an operating agreement. So a corporation and a limited liability company are largely the same thing, okay? But they're very different in that the corporate formalities, as well as things that you have to do to maintain them, right? But they provide similar levels of protection. They aren't different in that respect. Now, which one is right for you? In some instances, you have to form a corporation. You can't form an LLC. It depends, as we like to say quite frequently. And one of those things it depends on is what type of corporation. If you're just selling things that requires nothing extra, then a general stock corporation is perfectly fine. You're not going to need, or an LLC is perfectly fine. But like, for instance, doctors and lawyers, things that are regulated as a profession, we have to form a corporation or a limited liability partnership. That's an option. We're not going to talk about that today, but you cannot form an LLC yet in California. Now, in other states, that might not be true. So don't say that, oh, I saw your video on YouTube and I can do this in Iowa or Delaware or whatever. No, they're different. States have different rules and different laws regarding that. In California, an LLC cannot be owned, like for professional services, cannot be owned for professional services, but it can be owned for other things. And so generally, and 90% of the time, I counsel my clients to form an LLC. Now, in some instances, they're going to say, no, I want the corporation, I want the name, I want all that other stuff. The other thing is that if you're welcome to have that, but there are some disadvantages to having a corporation over an LLC. And the primary disadvantages is what's called double taxation. A shareholder in a corporation is, unless it's a S corp, and we're not going to talk about that today, but we will talk about that soon. A shareholder in a normal corporation is taxed on the earnings of their shares, and then if they're an owner, or if they're sorry, they are an owner. The corporation is then taxed on its earnings. Okay, so there is a double taxation thing going on, unless of course it's the S corp. So that's a pretty decent disadvantage to forming a corporation. In some instances, people want that. They want the the ink behind their company's name. They want uh, that title that goes with it, and that's fine. But just know that they're basically paying for it if they don't form an S corporation. Now, again, we'll talk about that at a different time. So an LLC allows you through what's called pass-through taxation, which means no double taxation. Pass-through taxation simply means it's like a sole proprietor. If you earn $100,000 as a LLC, then that's the amount of income. I didn't say revenue. Just keep that in mind. If you earned $100,000 after taxes or after expenses on an LLC, then that's what you're taxed on as an LLC, which is the same as what you'd be taxed on as a sole proprietor, or in the case of a partnership based on that percentage. Okay. Versus a corporation, you'd be taxed on the earnings of the shares as well as the earnings of the corporation. So that's a pretty big difference. Both of them are subject to California's state minimum tax of $800. So that's a consideration that you need to have, because you need to know that forming a business entity, although good, typically does cost money. It isn't as simple as saying, oh, well, it's the same thing, so let's go with it. So there's approximately, and I use that very vague, about $20,000 in income is about the point where a 20 to 24,000 is about the point where a sole proprietor and an LLC are about the same tax wise. Now, I am not a tax advisor. I'm not a tax consultant of any kind. I have to disclaim that, but that's just a general guide. So you would definitely want to talk to a CPA about what your individual tax situation is, because it's very different than I can't say as a blanket rule, do this or do that. Talk to your CPA about how your tax consequences for an LLC versus a corporation. But that's a significant one, and they'll be able to give you a better guide than I will. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them. I'm here to help you. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I'd love to help you. I'd love to talk with you. And I hope you have a great day. Talk to you soon.